Hey friends, I'm Michelle Markey, and today I've got the latest and greatest of the best high yield interest bank accounts as of October 2022. And as you know, this is a personal finance and investing channel, so I'm all about getting the highest returns, whether it's from stocks, bonds, or banks. So if that sounds good to you, please be sure to like and subscribe to my video and YouTube channel, and let me catch you up on some of the best interest you can get today, and also some new resources I came across as an update from what I covered in July. It almost feels like Christmas in October because bank interest rates are finally starting to be almost decent again, like they were before 2020 and 2021, where we got almost zilch in terms of interest. And the rate that we're currently seeing reflects what our friend Chairman Jerome Powell at the Federal Reserve is doing, where he's hiking the Fed funds rate to slay the inflation dragon. And the official rate is currently in the range of 3 to 3.25%. And a lot of economists project that that's actually going to go up in November to 3.75 to 4%, which will eventually have a trickle down effect into our bank account interest rates and also mortgage rates. So it's kind of good and bad. It's good for people who like to save in their bank accounts, but not so good if you're trying to get a mortgage rate, because those are probably going to go up. And it's usually about 3% above what the Fed funds rate is. And so if the current target range is 3%, the actual effective Fed funds rate is only 2.56%. And even though it still hasn't reached the target rate that the Fed set, it's on its way there. And we haven't seen this level above 2.5% since February 2005. And also this exceeds what the highest was in April 2019 of 2.42. So think of this as interest rates in your Christmas stockings, and we're probably going to need to rack up a bunch of interest to afford our pricier Christmas and other holiday gifts this holiday season. And for all intents and purposes, you can think of a money market account as basically interchangeable with a savings account. And that's how many banks advertise them, as like a money market savings account. And this is not to be confused with a money market fund, which you can usually find in your brokerage. And those generally offer way lower interest rate. And I'm not talking about brokerage money market accounts. So I'm only talking about the kind that's basically a savings account. And also some of these banks offer checking accounts that give just as high, if not sometimes higher interest than their savings accounts do. So sometimes it's all kind of random. So just think of any of these high yield accounts as pretty much interchangeable, as long as they're offering you a pretty high rate of return. And also I like to have a few criteria that I look for whenever I might open a bank account. And they include things like no minimum to open the account, no monthly fees, no overdraft fees, and also no balance limits in order to earn the highest yield. And also not many obstacles to have to jump over, like a certain amount of debit card transactions a month, because that's a little bit annoying. So I try to be on the lookout for those things. And so I do my usual look through of some of the most popular blogs for the highest yield bank accounts that include the likes of NerdWallet and Investopedia and Bankrate. And by the way, none of this is sponsored. And if I went through those slides pretty quickly, I'll catch you up on a list later that recaps most of these interest rates that I'll go through in a little bit more detail. But some of these are generally offering in the lower range of between 2 to 2.25%. So that's what you can generally expect. And a few of them offer higher yields, like 2.75 to 2.9%, which is more attractive. And sometimes they also have other deals that might be fun. So I'll also tell you a little bit what some of those perks might be. But that's basically what you can hope to expect. So at the very minimum, you should aim to have a bank account that's giving you at least 2% in interest these days. And what you're also going to want to do is ignore whatever star rating you see on NerdWallet or Bankrate, and actually go to other websites to read reviews, like on bestcashcow.com or depositaccounts.com. And on those sites, usually a lot of banks, even if they're kind of decent, have around 2 stars out of 5. So that's usually the going amount of stars you can expect. And if you see any banks that have around 2 stars or less, that's a little bit of a warning sign. But generally, if you see banks having at least 3 stars or more, then that is a suggested idea that maybe they're better than average banks. But overall, you should be skeptical about any online bank unless you know and trust their brand, or you have friends or family who have used that bank and you feel like you can trust them, because sometimes they have not the best customer service, depending on some banks that you could get that have high yields, but then not so good ways to get around the website or bad customer service. So maybe it's not worth the hassle, even if you're on the surface level getting higher yields. And also the perks that I was mentioning earlier that some banks offer include the likes of Fitness Bank, which you can get as high as 3.6% in opening both a checking and savings account if your savings account also has an average step count daily of 12,500. So that's a fun way to stay in shape while getting a pretty high interest rate of at least 3.5% in the savings account alone. And then another bank called Basque Bank, which is related to a Texas bank, also offers 2.75%, or also American Airlines AA Advantage miles. So that could also be an interesting perk if you like collecting miles from that airline carrier. And let me just say that there's no perfect bank account out there. As much as I wish that there were banks that offered you 5% APY on an unlimited balance. So even though that unicorn doesn't exist, maybe someday it will come around. But in the meantime, we might have to compromise with the rate of return we're expecting compared to the reviews that a bank has. And an example of this is if we try to compare UFB Direct, which is part of Axos Bank, and also Redneck Bank. And even though UFB Direct is giving a highly attractive rate of return of 3.01% annual percentage yield, or APY, and that is actually applicable to balances over $100,000 as well. In spite of that, the reviews that it has are only 1.5 stars, which is pretty dismal. And compare this to Redneck Bank, which is giving also a pretty attractive rate of return of 2.9%. But the catch is that that only applies to balances up to $10,000, and then balances over 10K will only earn 0.25% APY. But the flip side is that Redneck Bank actually has about 3.5 stars of positive reviews. So in that sense, maybe a lot of people have a really good customer service experience at Redneck Bank. So let's not judge a book by its cover and go by what we think we can trust and what works for us in our pocketbooks. And as promised, I surfed the 7 seas of the internet to bring you this October my list of over 50 high-yield bank accounts that range between 0.4% to as high as 5%, and the median is actually 2.7% and the average is 2.6%. And as you can see here, a lot of these banks actually have rates that are at 3% or better, with Vero Savings taking the highest amount at 5%. But if you read their website, it actually is a little bit of a catch, so pay attention to the limits that they have stipulated. And as we go down this list, there's quite a few that cluster around the 2.75% range, and then there's another cluster around the 2.25% range. And another one is that we have some low yielding banks, and I don't know why there are still a few that offer below 2%. And I just figure that some of those banks are behind the times. So that also could be a warning sign that maybe you don't want to settle for a bank that's giving you below 2% in interest. And the only exception to that maybe is if you get a pretty good opening bonus. Like, even though Chase Bank only has a savings rate of 0.01%, if you open, say, a checking account with them instead, you might get an opening bonus of $200, and that is kind of like getting a yield of 13.33%, but that's only one time. So you're not going to get that again in the future, but maybe that's worth it to get your yield kind of up front instead of waiting for a year to get interest from these other banks. So keep all this in mind in terms of what makes sense for you and your money. And while I was on my quest for the highest yields possible to share with you, I came across this interesting website called maxmyinterest.com, and it especially piqued my interest when it was saying things like you could earn up to 3.01% and keep your money under the FDIC insurance limits, which FDIC stands for Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And even though this sounded great at first, I realized in reading more of the FAQ fine print that Max is actually not a bank and they don't take custody of your money, but you keep your money at actual banks. But what this Max seems to be is like a dashboard that looks for the highest interest, where it might suggest where you could move your money to get the highest yields possible. But the catch to all this is that they charge a bit of a hefty fee for the service, of where they charge 0.02% or about $20 per $100,000 every quarter, or a minimum of $12 every quarter. So I kind of feel like instead of going with the service that, even though convenient, it's charging a little bit for basically something you could do yourself, of surveying some of the popular blog sites like I mentioned earlier, and also check out my videos to look for the highest yield, and you're not being charged any money for this. So I think that there are better ways to try to survey the highest yields and maybe take a pass on this service. And finally, for a little bit of a public service announcement, as you probably know, I like to save my money at banks that are FDIC insured. And so I try to not listen to the siren song of 6% offers from decentralized finance or DeFi or cryptocurrency entities that are trying to tempt me to put my money in something that is actually not legal tender and isn't backed by the federal government, and as an investment could entail risk that kind of doesn't sound like a good time to me, because a lot of these entities are not in fact banks, and so they're not going to qualify for the FDIC insurance that protects your money up to $250,000 that typical banks do. So definitely be on the lookout to make sure that any entity you sign up with online is FDIC insured if they're claiming to be a bank, and otherwise maybe don't really participate in some of these things that you're not sure if your money will be really safe in that. Because if you want digital currency, I think it's best to listen to one of the best investors of all time, Charlie Munger, who said that
we've got a digital currency already. It's called a bank account. The banks are all integrated with the Federal Reserve System. We already have a digital currency.
And if you enjoyed this video or learned something, please like and subscribe. And I wish you well on getting the best interest you can at whatever bank you bank at. Till next time.